Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the incredibly sad story of Isabella Thompson, whose real name was Crozier, and the murder of Margaret Ann Thompson, which took place at Bishop Auckland in 1854. I hope you will find it interesting. Due to the age of this story, there is little to no information about those involved in this week's case, mainly because Isabella seems to have moved from place to place and often used a false name, and Margaret was just a child of under 2 years old, so any backstory will be very basic. Isabella Thompson was said to be around 22 years old in some news articles. However, I believe that she may have been slightly older. She was said to have been born in Sunderland. She used the name Thompson, claiming to be married, but it seems that she may not have been married and her real name was Crozier, which some articles did actually use, but for the purpose of this story I will call her Thompson. She seems to have been someone who had little to no money and often ended up in the workhouse. It's not clear if she's a drinker, however she is described by many as being someone who is not of sound mind. Margaret Ann Thompson, the victim, was said to be just over a year old at the time of her death. Now I must add here that her age is different depending on who is talking or when they are talking, as Isabella does change her age on a few occasions. And it seems that everyone has a different idea about how old she actually was. She was born in Sunderland, and it appears that she'd been stolen from her natural parents by Isabella several months before her death. Before we go any further, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. It really is very much appreciated. And it is completely free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you any money, but it really does help to support the channel. And as always, I just want to add that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify, so I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. On January the 2nd, 1854, Isabella Thompson arrived at the Union Workhouse at Bishop Auckland with a young child. She claimed her name was Thompson and said she was a married woman down on her luck and had been recommended to the workhouse by the relieving officer. She was taken in along with her baby, and they were both washed and fed and placed on one of the wards. On January the 3rd, Margaret Ann, Isabella's baby, was taken ill. However, the doctor and the staff at the workhouse were able to treat her, and she seemed to be recovering well. The following day, she was taken ill again, and this time the doctor at the workhouse said someone must sit with her all night, and one of the staff had done so. However, at around 12:30 a.m, Isabella asked her to leave, so the member of staff left them alone. The following morning at around 8 a.m, the staff member went to check on Margaret Ann, and Isabella told her that she was a lot better. However, by 9 a.m, Margaret Ann had died. And it was thought that the death of Margaret Ann had been caused by Isabella Thompson, and a few days later she was arrested and charged with her willful murder. The inquest was held at the Union Workhouse in Bishop Auckland before Coroner Trotter. No details were given on the identification of the body of Margaret Ann. However, the master of the workhouse stated that the baby the jury had viewed was the same one Isabella had come to the workhouse with. Isabella was present at the inquest, and also she was with a man who it was thought went by the name of either John or Richard Thompson, and who Isabella said was her husband. Thomas Reynolds said he was the master of the workhouse. He had been present when Isabella had arrived on January the 2nd. He said that Isabella had said Margaret Ann was 11 months old. He said he had noted that Margaret Ann had a black eye, and Isabella had said this was because she had been sleeping rough in a tile shed, and that Margaret Ann had fallen during the night and hit her head. Anne Harrison said she worked at the workhouse in Bishop Auckland. She said she had also been present when Isabella had arrived. She said both Isabella and Margaret Ann were very dirty when they arrived, and she herself had cleaned the baby. She said she had noticed that she had a black eye and some other small bruises on her body. She said Isabella told her that she had suffered a fit and had dropped the child by accident. However, she later told her that her husband had struck her and hit Margaret Ann by mistake, causing her black eye. Anne said, apart from the bruises on Margaret Ann, they both appeared to be in quite good health. She said on the Wednesday night, Isabella came to find her, telling her that Margaret Ann was unwell. She said she had taken a fit. Anne said Margaret Ann was sitting on Isabella's knee when she went into the room and seemed lifeless. The medical officer, or the doctor of the workhouse, told her to place the baby in a warm bath, which she did, and she seemed to revive well. She then dried her and gave her to Isabella, leaving them with a fire in the room to keep warm. She said she had seen Margaret Ann the next morning and she was sitting up looking well. Anne said on Thursday night at around 11 p.m, Isabella came to her and said that Margaret Ann was dying. She said she went to see her and a doctor was sent for. She was told that it was not safe to leave her, and Anne said she would sit up with the baby all night to keep an eye on her. However, she said at around 12:30 a.m, Isabella said she would sit up with her, and Anne said she left them both alone for the rest of the night. On Friday morning at around 7:30 a.m, Anne said she went into the room and asked Isabella how Margaret Ann was, and she told her she was a lot better. She said she stayed for a while and left at 8 a.m, but she did not check on her, but she was sitting on Isabella's knee next to the fire. She said she then went to have her breakfast, and while she was there, someone came in and told her that Margaret Ann had died. She said later that day she had gone to the room and found Margaret Ann was on the bed, but there was no sign of Isabella, so she began to clean the room as she always did. She said she found signs of blood around the fireplace and some on the floor. She said she cleaned this but could not get all of the marks out, and after looking closer at Margaret Ann, she realised her face was all bruised, and she began to wonder if Isabella had struck her on the fireplace. She said the child had been quite well the previous night, but it had been suspected that Isabella was ill-treating her. She said Isabella did not seem to care or take much notice of the baby. Mr. Hutchinson, the medical officer to the workhouse, said he had attended Margaret Ann on the Wednesday night. She did not appear to him to have had any kind of convulsion. However, she did have a black eye. He said he had asked Isabella about this, and she had said her husband had done it. He said he'd been called back again at around 11 p.m. on the Thursday night. He said Margaret Ann now had a swelling on the left side of her head, and it appeared to be discoloured, adding that he felt the child was dying. He said he asked Isabella how this had happened, and she said Margaret Ann had thrown herself against the bed head while in a fit. He said he ordered that the mother and child were not to be left alone, and that he was to be notified if the child died. He said he'd been told the following morning that Margaret Ann had died at around 9 a.m. He said he'd also performed the postmortem on the body of Margaret Ann. He said he found the skull to be badly fractured and a lot of blood on the brain. He said it was his professional opinion that the skull fracture and the injury to the brain had been the cause of death. He noted that this could have been done using some kind of blunt instrument or by striking the child against the fireplace. There was no possible chance that Margaret Ann could have caused the injuries herself. Elizabeth Willis said she had a lodging house at Bishop Auckland. She said Isabella and the man who at the time was calling himself John had stayed there for just over a week. She said she had seen John ill-use the child, and Isabella did not seem concerned. She said she had spoken to John about his behaviour herself. She said she also noticed that Isabella did not seem to care much for the child and often treated her roughly. Isabella then gave evidence. She stated that she was the wife of Robert Thompson. She said she had left him at Hartlepool in June of 1853, and that since then she'd been living with a man by the name of John Mood, who was present at the inquest today. She said Margaret Ann was his child. She said he had often left her to look for work, but had not been able to work recently, as it had been too cold for him. She said she had not caused the death of Margaret Ann by any blow, adding that she might fling her down many a time, but had not given her a blow like the one described by the doctor. She said when in the workhouse, Margaret had taken a fit. She had suffered from them since she was 3 months old, and she was now 16 months old. She said John Mood had not treated her or the child well, and Margaret Ann had got her black eye when John had hit her. John Mood said Isabella had left him the previous Monday and had gone to the workhouse. He had not seen her since. He said Margaret Ann got her black eye because Isabella slipped and fell when she was carrying her and she hit her head. He did not say that Margaret Ann was his child. Sergeant Jackson said he had arrested Isabella on a charge of causing the death of Margaret Ann. He said she also told him that her black eye had been caused by her husband who had hit her. He said he had examined the room where they had been staying at the workhouse and found marks around the fireplace that he believed to be blood. He said the bed head was made of iron, but he saw no signs of blood there. Anne Harrison of the workhouse at Bishop Auckland was recalled, and she said, when asked, that after Margaret Ann's death, Isabella had wished to leave, saying she did not want to stay until the child was buried, as she wanted to go and find her husband. Anne said she had left and gone to seek lodgings outside of the workhouse, leaving the child behind. She also stated that no one had been in the room at the workhouse for over a week, and she had cleaned it before Isabella moved in, and she found no signs in the room of blood then. There are no details of the coroner summing up to the jury at the inquest, and it's quite difficult to try and guess what he might have said in this case. However, the jury, after a very short time, returned a verdict of guilty of wilful murder against Isabella Thompson, and she was committed for trial. It appears that John Mood was never charged with striking Margaret Ann, so we have to assume that no one believed he had done this. I did not find any details of a funeral for Margaret Ann. However, she would have no doubt been buried within the grounds of the workhouse, as many had their own cemetery areas, and because Isabella had left before the funeral, they would have taken care of the burial. A short time later, an article appeared in the local newspapers stating that in June of 1853 a child had been stolen from a couple in Sunderland, and that the person who had stolen the child had resembled Isabella Thompson. And after Margaret Ann's death had been reported in the newspapers, a lady by the name of Mrs. Thompson, her Christian name was never given, had travelled to Bishop Auckland believing Margaret Ann to be her missing child. She had immediately identified the baby as being her missing daughter and told the police that Isabella had come to work for her in 1853 and had been known then as Isabella Crozier. She said Isabella had taken her daughter out one day and never returned. She said her husband had placed adverts trying to find her and even offered a reward, but until now they had not known what had happened to either Isabella or their child. Although it's not stated, I think we can assume that Mrs. Thompson will have taken Margaret Ann to be buried again in a cemetery close to where she lived. The trial took place in Durham in March of 1854 before Mr. Justice Cresswell. Isabella pleaded not guilty to the charge. As is often the case, a lot of evidence at the trial is the same as that given at the inquest. However, on this occasion, a lot more evidence came to light at the trial. Mrs. Thompson of Sunderland, and the real mother of Margaret Ann, was the first witness called. On seeing Isabella, she immediately recognised her as the woman who had worked for her and was greatly upset at the sight of her. She had to be given time to recover before she was able to continue with her evidence. She stated that in June of 1853, Isabella had come to her house and asked if she needed any help to take care of her child. At the time, she said she was unwell herself and the help was welcomed. She said it had been difficult for her to look after the baby herself, while confined to bed most days. She said after only a couple of weeks working for her, she found that Isabella had taken some of her own clothes and moved them into her room, and when she asked her if she had placed them there by mistake, Isabella said no, she had done it on purpose. She said she did not understand why she had done this and thought it odd, but she still needed her help, so did not dismiss her. She stated that the following day she had sent Isabella to buy some oil, and she had taken her daughter with her and never returned. The child, she said, was simply called Margaret, not Margaret Ann, and at the time she went missing she was 13 months old. She said when her husband had returned from work the day that Isabella had gone missing, he had immediately gone to the police. They had searched Sunderland for days but had not been able to find her, and she said they themselves had sent out handbills offering a reward, but no one had found her daughter. She said during the time she had employed Isabella, she had not noticed anything odd about her or any kind of odd behaviour. She had always seemed to be perfectly sane to her. She said she had next seen Isabella at the prison in Durham. She had recognised her immediately, but when she spoke to her, Isabella had denied knowing her. She said it was possible that she did not recognise her, as when she had employed Isabella, she had been suffering from a skin disease that may have disfigured her face. She said she had recognised the body of her child immediately, and at this point she again became greatly distressed and was not questioned any further. Hannah Miller of Sunderland said she was the neighbour of Mrs. Thompson. She said she remembered Isabella from her time in the employment of her neighbour. She said in June of 1853, the 18th, she had seen Isabella leaving the house with Margaret. She said she asked her where she was going, but she did not reply. She said the child was not properly dressed and only had one shoe on. She said she had recently accompanied Mrs. Thompson to Bishop Auckland to view the body of the child, and she had also recognised her as the true child of Mrs. Thompson. Mary Turner of Sunderland said she had also seen Isabella when she had been employed by Mrs. Thompson. She said she had known her by the name of Isabella Crozier. She said she had also seen her in June leaving with the child in her arms, and she said the prisoner in the dock was the same woman. Superintendent Brown said Isabella had come to the police station on January the 9th asking for help to find lodgings. He said he had refused as he was not in the habit of helping paupers with free lodgings. He said he had not arrested her for the murder of Margaret Ann at this time as he did not know about it. He had sent Sergeant Jackson to arrest her once details from the blood found at the workhouse became known. George Greenwell said he was the relieving officer for Bishop Auckland. He said on January the 2nd, Isabella had come to him as a destitute woman. He said she had told him her name was Isabella Mood and she was a married woman from Liverpool. He said she had a small child with her and he had asked her where her husband was, and he said she had told him he had died. Anne Harrison gave much the same evidence as she had done at the inquest, adding that Dr. Hutchinson had said she must sit up with the child all night, she must not be left alone with Isabella. She now said she had done so until Isabella told her that she did not plan to sit with her all night, and no one else had any right to do so either. So she had left Margaret Ann alone with Isabella and gone to her own room. This was slightly different to the evidence that she had given at the inquest. Mary Duckworth said she was the cook at Bishop Auckland Workhouse. She said on the Thursday night she had noted that the left side of Margaret Ann's face was swollen and discoloured. She said Isabella told her she had hit her head on the bedpost while in a fit. She said she had gone to see the mistress of the workhouse and she had sent for the doctor. She said on the Friday morning she had gone to visit Isabella and asked her how the child was. She said Isabella told her that she was doing nicely. She said she decided to go closer and have a better look as Isabella was covering the child's face. She said when she uncovered her face she knew at once that the child was dead. The defence then spoke to the jury, stating that he wished he could pass this case on to another, but he had been asked to defend Isabella and he must do so. He said many had spoken since the case came to light that Isabella should be hanged, but he felt they should think carefully about this before making any such decision. He said there was no clear evidence that Isabella had killed Margaret Ann. The door to her room was not locked and anyone could have gone inside. But if they felt Isabella was responsible, then they must decide if they believed she was of sound mind at the time she committed this awful crime. He then called several witnesses who he said would show the state of mind of the prisoner was not a sound one. Margaret McNally said she had lived with the prisoner in Sunderland for a short time. She said she used to take fits, talk in her sleep, and had once threatened to cut her throat for no clear reason. Hannah Wilkinson said she had also spent time living in Sunderland with Isabella. She considered her to be of unsound mind. She often talked to herself and had twice tried to cut her own throat. A female warder of Durham prison, who was not named, said she remembered when Isabella first arrived, she acted in a very strange, excitable manner and had never been left alone at any time while she had been waiting to take her trial. James Crozier said Isabella was his sister. He said she had always acted strangely and had been thought as someone of unsound mind by most of his family. He said she often talked to herself and used to dress dolls and sit them on her knee, treating them as if they were real people. He said when she was a little older, she used to chase men in the street for no clear reason. The Reverend Hamilton, the chaplain of Durham prison, said he agreed that Isabella was very strange in her manner. He said she had been unable to communicate well, and he too had believed that she was not safe to be left alone. The prosecution said they wished to respond by calling witnesses who would say Isabella was perfectly sane. The defence objected to this. However, the prosecution's witnesses were allowed, and these included the prison doctor, who stated that he had visited Isabella daily and had never felt her to be anything other than sane, and several other witnesses all said they had not seen anything about her to suggest that she was insane, perhaps a little confused with her story, but not insane. Isabella was not called to give evidence on her own behalf. The judge, in summing up, stated it was for the jury to decide if they felt that Isabella had caused the death of Margaret Ann by means of a blow on the fireplace. If they felt this was the case, then they must also decide if she had been in her right mind at the time she committed the crime. He then added that there was already something strange about a woman who stole the child of another, claiming it as their own, and it was also strange that he was not able to find any motive for her wishing the child dead, and even if she had no longer wanted the child, why take her to the workhouse where she was sure to be found out if she ill-used her while she was there. The jury retired for 20 minutes before returning a verdict of guilty of wilful murder against Isabella Thompson, but that she had committed the crime in a moment of temporary insanity. The judge then sentenced Isabella to penal servitude for life. Isabella does not seem to have made any reply to the sentence and was quickly removed from the dock and returned to Durham prison. I did not find out which prison Isabella was sent to serve out her sentence. However, in 1863 she was deemed to be insane and was sent to Bethlehem Criminal Lunatic Asylum. Now, Bethlehem had a terrible reputation, and it was somewhere that no one wished to be sent to. How well Isabella coped there is unknown, and I did not find any details of her after this date. This was a most tragic story. It's hard to understand why Isabella stole Margaret in the first place. There are no details of her losing a child of her own, and no suggestion that she had ever done anything similar in the past. It doesn't really seem like something she had planned, more something she did on a whim on the day when she took the child out. The only small clue we have about her past is that her brother suggested her family felt she was not of sound mind. However, no one seems to have ever tried to get any help for her. But of course, in the early 1800s, finding help for any kind of illness, especially if the family were poor, was not an easy task. But I do have to wonder if she had received medical help when she was first thought insane, then this whole sorry case may never have happened. It is quite clear that Isabella was not behaving in a normal manner because of the various different stories she told, not seeming to be able to tell the truth or to actually know what the truth was, changing her story about Margaret's black eyes several times, changing her name, saying she was married and then stating that her husband was dead, then later saying that the man she was with was not her husband at all. It is impossible to tell if she'd ever been married or who she'd been married to. Was it a man by the name of Richard Thompson or no one at all? And Richard Thompson, if he existed, certainly never came forward to give any evidence. Even some of the witnesses from the workhouse seemed confused in their evidence in this case, with Anne Harrison in one account stating the child was so ill that she could not be left alone, then stating that she had seemed quite well the night before she died. Now, I personally feel that Isabella was not of sound mind. It's not normal for someone to steal a child if they are perfectly well at the time, and I feel she struggled with reality and made things up that she possibly fully believed to be the truth. And I also feel that she did kill Margaret Ann. She admitted to treating her badly but not to hitting her hard enough to kill her, but it is possible she was afraid to admit what she had done, or did not even realise she had done it. Were the jury correct to find her guilty? Well, yes, I do believe they were, as there seems to be no one else who could have been responsible for Margaret Ann's death. But I also believe they were correct to suggest that she was insane at the time. This, it seems, was also proven with her eventual removal from prison to the criminal lunatic asylum several years later. And I also have to say that I feel incredibly sorry for Mrs. Thompson, the real mother of Margaret Ann. It seems she took someone in to help her in good faith, and sadly this resulted in the loss of her baby. She seemed to be concerned by some of the behaviour of Isabella, but not enough to feel that her daughter was in danger. And it must be something that she too would have felt guilty about for the rest of her life. And it must have been awful to know that to identify the body of her daughter she had to be exhumed first, and that she was viewing a child that had already been buried. It must have been incredibly difficult for her, and as I say, something that she had to live with for the rest of her life as well. But what do you think? Do you think Isabella was responsible for the death of Margaret Ann, or do you think John Mood, or Thompson, or whatever he was called, had hit her before Isabella left and he was responsible? Do you think Isabella was of unsound mind and did not know what she was doing? Or do you think, based on the fact that she left the workhouse before the child was buried, that she simply wanted rid of the baby and had known exactly what she was doing from the start? Do you think the jury were right to find her guilty but of unsound mind, or do you think she should have been hanged? Do please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this very sad and tragic story interesting. I do tend to stay away from the child murders. I always find them incredibly sad. But this story felt like it needed to be told for the sake of poor Margaret Ann, so that she is never forgotten. I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again next week.